I poured my life savings into buying them a house only to hear, she should have written the check and stayed out of it. Fine. I pulled back. The mortgage payments stopped. My name came off the deed. Let whoever owns it deal with it now. What they didn't know was, I left behind more than just a cancellation notice. I left something that could blow their whole life apart. I drove my nearly decade-old SUV down the long coastal highway toward Caleb's new home. The jazz drifting from the radio was smooth and mellow, but my palms were damp against the steering wheel. This was my first official visit. They'd moved in months ago, but according to them, they'd just been too busy settling in to invite me over. I hadn't wanted to intrude. Over the phone, Caleb gave me a brief summary. It's not huge, but it's close to Lola's school and the neighborhood's decent. What he didn't say was who scraped together the down payment for this place. Or who's still transferring money each month to help with the mortgage. Of course, I hadn't planned on bringing it up either. I don't know why, but even though I paid for this home, I felt more like a guest invited to a dinner party. Tentative, slightly nervous. By the time I pulled up, the sky had begun to dim. Streetlights blinked on one by one, illuminating the front yard's neatly trimmed grass and a quaint wooden sign that read "Home Sweet Home." I reached over to grab the homemade cookies from the passenger seat just as a familiar voice called out. "Mom, you made it. Thank God, we really needed the help." Caleb hurried out, a warm smile on his face, but I caught the tension behind his eyes. I returned the smile, handed him the cookie tin and looked up, really looked, for the first time at their house. Beige siding, crisp clean lines, freshly painted front door. A small wind chime danced in the breeze. Everything looked new, respectable, and oddly distant. Taylor came out next. She wore a pale cashmere cardigan, her makeup flawless. She smiled when she saw me, polite, pleasant, distant. "Oh, how lovely. Thank you so much, Judy." She took the cookies and turned toward the kitchen, her movements efficient, like checking off a box on a list. I slipped off my coat and hung it on a hook by the door. The living room was immaculate, soft gray sofas with matching throw pillows, a faint hint of lemongrass drifting from the diffuser in the corner. Everything was in its place. Everything, except for me. Caleb led me into the dining room. The table was already set. Lola sat at the far end, coloring. When she saw me, her little hand shot up in an excited wave. "Grandma." My heart melted. I walked over, crouched down and smoothed her soft honey-brown curls. "That's beautiful, sweetheart." She giggled, wide-eyed and beaming. "Mom, come sit," Caleb said, pulling out a chair between him and Lola. I eased into it, careful not to disturb the perfect symmetry of the room. Dinner was pleasant on the surface. Taylor talked about a new project at her boutique, her tone brisk and goal-oriented. Caleb chimed in occasionally, nodding and smiling, playing supportive husband. I sat quietly, waiting for an opening, a moment to connect. But every time I opened my mouth, the conversation shifted, smooth as water, slipping right past me. "We're thinking of making an early payment on the loan," Taylor said casually, reaching for more salad. I glanced at Caleb. He hesitated, then managed a smile. "Yeah, Mom. The mortgage is still a lot. If we could pay it off faster, it'd really help ease things." The message was clear enough. They wanted me to keep footing the bill. To carry them just a little further. I put down my fork, tracing a fingertip over the edge of the tablecloth. A dull ache stirred in my stomach. When I agreed to help with the down payment, I told myself it was an investment in their future. A gift of love. But sitting here now, watching the polite distance on their faces, I couldn't help but wonder. Had I become something to be drained? A resource, not a person? Someone when needed. Forgotten when not. After dinner, I offered to play with Lola. "She can, but she needs to finish her workbook first," Taylor said, smiling, but with a tone that left no room for negotiation. "And Judy, we try to keep dinner time quiet. It helps her concentrate." I blinked, nodded. Lola bounced up the stairs, workbook in hand. The room felt bigger once she was gone, quieter, colder. The diffuser hummed. Far off, I could hear waves crashing against the shore. Sensing the tension, Caleb walked over and gave my shoulder a pat. "Mom, once we're done with the loan and things ease up, we'll have more time to spend with you." His voice was gentle, familiar, like the little boy who used to promise me everything would be okay. But something in that familiarity was missing. The part where I used to be the center of his world. I gave him a soft smile and said nothing at all. I sat on the couch in Caleb's new living room, a cup of peppermint tea growing cold beside me. The TV was on, volume turned down low, some popular reality show flickering across the screen. Taylor sat across from me in a single armchair, a laptop balanced on her knees, tapping away at the keyboard from time to time. From the kitchen, the soft clinking of dishes floated in. Caleb was cleaning up after dinner, moving with quick, practiced ease. No one really spoke. Just the distant laughter from the television and the muted clatter of porcelain. I cleared my throat gently and tried to make conversation. "So, how's Lola doing at school these days?" Taylor glanced up, offering a perfectly polite smile. "She's doing well. Her teacher says she's very gifted. We're really focusing on structure and discipline right now, so we've cut back on a lot of leisure time." With that, she turned her eyes back to her laptop, fingers moving again. Her voice had no warmth, more like an automated message than a mother bragging about her child. I nodded, fingertips brushing the rim of my mug, unsure of what to say next. I had wanted to ask what Lola was drawing lately, which books she was into. But after that icy response, the words retreated down my throat. A strange sense of displacement settled over me. I was the one who raised Caleb, who held him through the lean, lonely years. And now, in this house built with my money, I felt like someone carefully placed on the margins. Welcomed but not meant to disrupt their rhythm. Upstairs, I heard Lola's door click shut. For a moment, silence. Then Caleb walked in with 3 mugs of coffee, breaking the awkward air. "Mom here, added a little cinnamon. Just how you like it." He smiled as he handed me the cup, his voice gentle. I took it, fingers brushing the lingering warmth, and for a second I felt something soften inside me. But that warmth was quickly eclipsed by something else. A quiet kind of sorrow. They weren't unkind to me, not at all. But their kindness had become the kind you give to a respected elder, not to someone you're close with. Not out of love, but out of obligation. I smiled and thanked him, taking a sip. The coffee was good, just the right blend. Still, it left a trace of bitterness on my tongue. The next day, I returned to my quiet little apartment. As the door clicked shut behind me, the only sounds left were the soft hum of the heater and the occasional creak of the old wooden floors. I sat at the kitchen table, sorting through a stack of unopened mail. One envelope caught my eye. A monthly statement from the bank. Automatic payment confirmation. $1,500 successfully debited from your account for Caleb Banks. Mortgage plan active. I stared at the numbers for a long time. There was a time when this felt like something to be proud of. Helping my son get on his feet. Building him a better future. But now, the money leaving my account each month felt less like love, and more like a silent transaction. Even a simple thank you had started to feel like too much to hope for. I sighed and set the letter back on the table. That evening, as usual, I went for a walk behind my building through the little neighborhood park. The trail was soft with fallen pine needles, and the air carried the faint, salty scent of the sea. Rounding the bend, I spotted Martha, my neighbor and longtime friend. Like me, she was retired. Unlike me, she didn't spend much energy worrying about her grown children. She was more focused on living her own life and living it well. She sat on a bench under the fading orange sky, wrapped in a blue-gray wool hat, a thick novel open in her lap. "Martha," I called, smiling as I approached. She looked up and waved, patting the spot beside her. "Come sit. You look worn out. Who got under your skin this time?" I let out a soft laugh and settled beside her, eyes drifting toward the gently swaying grass beyond the path. "No one upset me," I said softly. "It's just, sometimes I feel like I don't quite belong anymore." Martha closed her book and turned to me, her eyes sharp with that no-nonsense clarity she always carried. "Judy, are you spinning around everyone else again?" Her tone was steady, unwavering. "You spent half your life raising that boy and holding your family together. That's enough. You don't owe them anything anymore." I gave a tight, weary smile and said nothing. She reached over, gave my hand a firm pat. Her voice lowered, but every word landed with weight. "Don't chain your life to someone else's. The kids have their own lives. It's time you started living yours." He paused, then added, "Don't forget, retirement isn't the end. It's the beginning of freedom. Look at me, I've never been more at peace." I stared at her strong, unflinching profile and something inside me shifted, just a little, like a knock on a locked door. That night I couldn't sleep. Memories poured in like a tide. Caleb's small hands gripping mine, the frantic days behind stage curtains, those long years of sacrifice for home for him. I had always believed that a mother's worth came from giving, quietly, endlessly. But somewhere along the way that giving had turned into a growing distance. Maybe it was time to stop. Maybe I needed to ask myself the question I'd never dared to voice. Beyond them, was there still a life that belonged to me? Sunday evening I went back to Caleb's house. He had sounded casual on the phone. "Mom, we're just doing a simple dinner this weekend. Figured we could talk a bit about Lola's school plans." That tiny flicker of warmth sparked again in me. Maybe, just maybe, I could still find my way back into their rhythm. Dinner was quiet, orderly, the kind of meal you could call nice but never warm. Afterward I offered to help with the dishes. I carried plates into the kitchen, letting the routine settle around me. That's when I heard it. A conversation I was never meant to catch. The scent of freshly ground coffee lingered in the air as I stood at the sink, rinsing plates. Warm water ran over my fingers, but my mind drifted elsewhere. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Taylor and Caleb slip into the small study. They didn't shut the door completely. Just enough to pretend privacy. That narrow gap pulled at my attention like gravity. "She's going to start coming over more often," Taylor said, voice low, edged with annoyance. "I know," Caleb replied, sounding resigned. "If she really wants to help, she should just write a check, not keep showing up and messing with our routines." Taylor's words hung in the air like cold smoke. Then came the sting. "She's not struggling. She's got her pension savings. We're the ones who actually need the support now." The plate nearly slipped from my hand into the sink. The sound it made was small, but in the quiet kitchen, it rang like an alarm. I quickly turned down the water, my movements suddenly deliberate. "She probably just wants to help," Caleb murmured. Taylor let out a dry laugh, sharper now. "Help? Then make it clean. Stop interfering with Lola's education. Stop throwing off our schedule." She paused, then lowered her voice even more. "She always has to insert herself. If it's not financial, it's emotional. It's too much." Silence. Even the ticking clock in the next room felt painfully loud. Finally, Caleb sighed. "I know. I'll take care of it." I stood frozen, my hands still submerged. The water had turned lukewarm, but my chest felt cold and tight. I thought, at the very least, I was still a part of their lives. Not perfect maybe, but present. Someone they'd show grace to. Instead I was just an account. A retirement fund. A potential check. Not a person. Not family. Just a convenient support beam in their well-designed life. I wiped my hands on my sleeve, forced myself to take a deep breath. The scent of coffee and dish soap mixed in the air, suddenly nauseating. I don't know how long I stood there. But eventually footsteps approached. "Mom." Caleb's voice was warm as always. "Take a break. I've got this." I turned, offering him a soft, distant smile as if I'd heard nothing at all. "It's all right," I said gently. "Almost done." He paused for a beat, maybe sensing the shift. But he didn't ask. By the time I left their house that night, the sky had settled into a deep, heavy darkness. The coastal wind bit at my cheeks, sharp and cold. I walked slowly, my steps crunching over gravel, the empty cookie tin in my hand feeling heavier with each stride, like a stone I didn't know how to put down. When I got back to my apartment and shut the door, I leaned against it, drained. I didn't cry. But there was a hollow inside me, something deeper than sadness, more cutting than anger. It was clarity. Cold, sharp, and inescapable. I sat down at the kitchen table and opened my laptop. My eyes settled on the shrinking balance in my account. All this time I believed that if I gave without asking, if I poured myself out completely, I'd earn a place in their world. But now I saw it for what it was. Not all giving is seen as love. Sometimes it's just seen as available. Expected. I closed the laptop and looked out the window. The city was wrapped in a net of black. And somewhere on the edge of that vast darkness, I found a sliver of light. Clarity. Saturday afternoon brought sunshine to the little seaside town. I stood in front of Caleb's house, a small gift bag in hand filled with new toys for Lola. I took a deep breath. Today was her birthday party. Taylor had invited neighbors, classmates, and a few other parents. I had promised to help decorate, and I brought a surprise gift for Lola. A handmade miniature puppet theater and her favorite wooden characters. Part of me was hopeful. Maybe today wouldn't be so awkward. Maybe, just maybe, I'd feel like family again. Inside, the house buzzed with the laughter of children. Balloons floated gently beneath the ceiling. Streamers trembled in the breeze of the air conditioner. I set the gift on a side table and stepped into the kitchen to help with the plates. Taylor moved swiftly, directing other parents, fingers dancing over her phone as she coordinated the event with precision. Caleb was out back, pitching a tent in the yard, his usual friendly smile stretched across his face. I kept my head down, moving carefully around the room, trying not to disturb their flow. Later it was time for the cake. Lola sat in front of it wearing a birthday crown, beaming. I stood on the edge of the crowd, smiling softly, watching her. Caleb leaned down and whispered something in her ear. She blinked, then leapt from her chair and grabbed my hand. "Grandma, you have to make a wish with me." The room fell suddenly quiet. All eyes turned to me. I froze for a moment, instinctively glancing at Taylor. Her smile stiffened. A flicker of something, annoyance, disapproval, flashed through her eyes. Caleb jumped in, chuckling. "Of course. It's Lola's birthday wish after all." Lola pulled me toward the cake. I stood beside her as she closed her eyes. Her voice rang out in the candlelight, soft and clear. "I wish Grandma can always play house with me, and do little plays on our stage." My throat clenched. My eyes burned. But just as warmth started to rise in my chest, I glanced at Taylor. She stood off to the side, gripping a napkin tightly, her gaze as sharp and cold as glass. The moment the candles flickered out, the little warmth I had left vanished with the flame. That evening after the party, the guests had gone and the children were winding down. The house felt quieter but not quite relaxed. The atmosphere hovered, loosened but tense. I sat with a cup of cold coffee, finally gathering the strength to speak. My voice was soft, but it cut through the quiet like a needle. "Caleb." "Taylor." I paused, keeping my tone steady. "I want to ask you something." They both looked at me. "In your eyes," I said slowly, looking them straight in the face. "Am I truly family, or just a convenient checkbook?" The air seemed to freeze for a moment. Caleb opened his mouth, but his smile faltered. Taylor raised her eyebrows and calmly set down her cup. "Judy," she said, polite but firm, "no one sees you that way. But our family has its own rhythm, its own rules. What we need is support, not interference." Caleb quickly added, "Mom, that's not what we meant. It's just, sometimes you do too much. We also need space." Space. I repeated the word, feeling it settle like a rock in my chest. Taylor nodded, her expression cool and resolute. "Yes. We're grateful for the financial help. But that doesn't mean you get to shape how we live our lives." And just like that, I understood. It wasn't that I loved them wrong. It wasn't that I didn't give enough. It was that I never belonged in the role I kept trying to play. All this time I was loving them in my language. But they never asked for it. They never wanted it. What they needed was something else entirely. I set the cup down and stood up. My throat was dry, but my voice came out calm. Too calm. "I understand," I said. "Mom," Caleb called out. But I didn't look back. I picked up my coat, opened the door and walked out into the damp, cold night. The sea wind hit my face with a sharp edge, and beneath the streetlight, I saw my shadow stretching long and thin on the pavement. Small and very much alone. When I got home, I dropped my coat onto a chair. I sat on the couch like someone who'd been hollowed out, staring blankly into the dark. The only sound in the room was the soft hum of the old heater. At last I spoke, just to myself, quietly. "That's enough, Judy. Truly, that's enough." I woke early the next morning. The sky hadn't yet lightened, and outside, only the faint sound of sea breeze brushed the windows. The clock ticked steadily in the kitchen. Each tick a quiet reminder. It's time to change. I brewed a cup of black coffee and sat at the table. The glow of my laptop lit up the room in pale, cold light. I pulled up the joint bank account I shared with Caleb. There it was, every month like clockwork, a withdrawal for their mortgage payment. The home I had helped buy. The loan I had silently been carrying. My eyes lingered on the numbers. Then my finger hovered over the cancel auto payment option. For a moment, a flicker of hesitation. Then clarity. Sharp, resolute. I clicked. A confirmation box popped up. "Are you sure you want to cancel this automatic payment?" I inhaled deeply. Clicked yes. Then I opened my email. Typed out a short, direct message. Subject: adjustment regarding mortgage support. Starting next month, I will no longer be contributing to your mortgage payments. The house is part of your life. It should be your responsibility. This doesn't mean I don't love you. It means I need to start taking care of my own future. I hope you understand. Mom. I read it once. Didn't edit a word. Then hit send. As the message flew off, I felt a strange emptiness. But then, a small, steady sense of freedom began to fill that space. Around noon, my phone lit up. Caleb calling. I didn't answer right away. Let it ring 3 times before picking up. Mom, did you make a mistake? His voice was tight, restless. I leaned against the kitchen doorway, watching the palm trees sway outside. My voice was calm, almost gentle. No, Caleb. No mistake. It's just time you and Taylor carried this house yourselves. There was a pause. A few seconds of quiet. Then he said softly, but Mom, things are really tight right now. Taylor just started a new job, the mortgage is a lot. I understand, I said, cutting in without anger. But you're both adults now. And adults take responsibility for their choices. On the other end, I heard him exhale. A long, weary sigh. I could picture him, brow furrowed, pacing across the living room floor. That little boy who used to squeeze my hand and ask if everything would be okay. Now negotiating with the same hand that once fed him. I didn't blame him. I was the one who'd made giving feel like a given. Mom. His voice cracked a little. Are you still mad? I closed my eyes. Took a breath. No, I said quietly. I'm not mad. I just finally understand. Early spring had come to the seaside town, but the air still carried a touch of chill. I tucked my hands into my coat pockets and walked slowly along the sidewalk. The young sycamore trees lining the street had just started to bud, soft, pale green against a sky the color of faded denim. It was the first time I'd walked this path with no weight on my shoulders. Not to run errands. Not to pick someone up. Not to pay for anything. Just because I wanted to take a walk. It had been 3 weeks since I moved into my new apartment in the city center. Small, yes. But clean, bright, and mine. Outside my window, a quiet side street. And if I left it open at night, I could hear the waves crashing faintly against the seawall. Best of all, I was close to the old theater where I used to work. Close enough to feel grounded again. The first week was the hardest. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, staring at the ceiling, lost in the silence. Feeling like a child who'd wandered too far from home. But slowly I started to settle in. I got used to waking up and making myself a cup of Earl Grey just the way I like it. I got used to not checking anyone's schedule but mine. I got used to watching the sunset spill across my floor while I sorted through old props and memories, the ones that were always mine, and finally mattered again. Today I was headed to a public class at the Community Arts Center. A hands-on workshop in stage prop making. Not for work. Not to prove anything. Just because when I heard about it, something inside me stirred. A flicker of excitement I hadn't felt in years. That tiny thrill reminded me. I'm still alive. And I still have time to rediscover what I love. To reclaim all the richness and wholeness I didn't know I still carried inside me. The Arts Center sat in a restored brick building with arched windows and a row of wind-leaning pines along the walkway. As I stepped inside, the soft scent of sawdust and acrylics greeted me. Around a long wooden table, people of all ages busied themselves with scissors, fabric, and bits of foam and wood. There was an old man in khakis and a baseball cap, a woman in a floral dress with oversized glasses, and a few younger volunteers helping to pass out supplies. A short-haired woman with salt and pepper hair smiled and walked over to me. Her voice was gravelly but warm. New face? First time here. She handed me a canvas toolkit. I nodded, smiling as I took it. My fingers brushed over the fabric, the wood, and something inside me tightened in a beautiful, familiar way. Like I'd been swept back to those old theater days, behind the curtain, stitching props under deadline. I chose a spot by the window. Sunlight poured through the tall arches, spilling warm and golden across the table. The class was simple, especially for someone who had spent years crafting stage sets. But for me, it felt less like learning, more like having a conversation with a version of myself I'd forgotten. The instructor guided us through building miniature theater sets, using old frames, fabric scraps, and textured paper. Before long, I was completely immersed. The snip of scissors, the soft hiss of glue, the steady rhythm of careful fingers pressing pieces into place. All around me, quiet conversation and bursts of laughter mingled with the smell of wood and paint. When I finally glued down the last bit of the backdrop, I leaned back and looked at the tiny theater I'd built. A surge of quiet pride rose in my chest. Not because anyone had praised me. Not because I had to prove anything. But because I had wanted to make it. And I had. I took a photo and uploaded it to the social media account I'd barely touched in years. Just one photo. One line of text. Today I built a little stage of my own again. And when I hit post, I couldn't help but smile. Felt like lighting a tiny lantern just for me. Later that afternoon, as I returned home and began to make a cup of tea, my phone lit up. A message from Caleb. "Mom, how have you been lately?" Only a few words. But the tone, tentative, careful. I didn't reply right away. I stood at the kitchen counter, the steam rising from the kettle, just staring at the screen. A few blocks away, in a noisy sports bar, Caleb sat across from his childhood friend Mike. "She just cut everything off," Caleb muttered, downing a sip of beer. "She's never done that before." Mike glanced at him, setting his glass down with a soft clink. "How long has it been since you actually asked her what she needs?" Caleb blinked. "You've been taking her money. Her time. Her love." Mike said quietly. "But have you ever thought that maybe what she needs isn't to be needed?" He paused. "Maybe she just wants to be respected." Later that night, as Caleb drove home, the streetlights slid past his windshield like a string of fading stars. His hands gripped the steering wheel. But in his mind, one word kept repeating: respect. So simple. So devastating. Back in my apartment, I sat under the soft glow of the table lamp, a warm cup of Earl Grey in my hands. I flipped through next week's class schedule from the Arts Center. The window was cracked slightly open. The ocean breeze rolled in, crisp, clean. And the room? It was warm. Quiet. And for the first time in a very long time, so was the peace inside me. The afternoon sun spilled through the apartment windows, so bright it turned the wood floors nearly white. I sat at the small kitchen table, browsing the community calendar, considering whether to sign up for the upcoming pottery class. My phone sat silent on the corner of the table. Then lit up. Faded. Lit up again. Caleb calling. I stared at the screen for a moment. Then pressed silent. A subtle unease stirred in my chest. Hours passed. Then came a text. "Mom, can we talk sometime soon? There's something I want to discuss." I let out a slow breath. But I didn't answer. Not yet. At that same moment, tension in Caleb's kitchen had reached its breaking point. "You have no plan at all." Taylor's voice rose to a near shout, slamming the stack of bills down on the kitchen table. Caleb rubbed at his temples, the frustration thick in his voice. "I'm doing the best I can, Taylor. I'm paying the mortgage, I cover daily expenses too. What more do you want from me?" "What more?" Taylor let out a bitter laugh, her face pale and rigid. "Since your mom stopped sending money, our financial pressure has doubled. And you just complain, but you haven't done a thing to fix it." Lola stood frozen at the top of the stairs, her tiny fingers wrapped tight around the banister, eyes wide with worry. She didn't make a sound, just watched her parents shout, her face small and tense. The dining room light flickered slightly, and the air in the house seemed stretched so tight it might snap. Caleb suddenly slammed his hand on the table, the noise jolting the nearby glasses. "She's my mother," he roared. "She's done more for us than anyone. What else do you want from her? She's not a bank." Taylor clenched her jaw. Her eyes glistened with tears, but she held them back. "And we're not freeloaders," she said hoarsely. "But if we don't even have stability, what kind of life is this?" The room fell silent. Only the ticking of the wall clock remained. And the soft sound of Lola sniffling. Caleb turned and saw her crouched on the stairs, wiping her face with her sleeve. His heart wrenched. All the heat, the anger, it vanished in an instant. Late that night, Caleb sat slumped on the living room couch, his head buried in his hands. Taylor sat across from him, holding Lola close. Her eyes were puffy, her shoulders tense. The house was still the same, but something in it had shifted. It felt like a crucial piece had been quietly pulled away. The foundation they had worked so hard to maintain was beginning to crack. That night, I sat alone on my balcony, a warm mug of hot chocolate in hand. The distant waves echoed softly through the dark. I didn't know why, but a strange feeling washed over me. A mother's sixth sense. I glanced at my phone. Still that same unread message. After a long pause, I finally tapped out a reply. I'm free tomorrow afternoon. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. The breeze carried the salty air toward me. Like embers of a former life, glowing faintly in the night before fading away. The next day Caleb and I spoke on the phone. His voice was worn thin like fabric pulled too tight for too long. Mom, Taylor and we've been fighting. He paused. Then more quietly. Probably has something to do with you stopping the mortgage support. I said nothing. Just let him speak. I know we can't keep relying on you. I do, he said almost to himself. It's just, facing all of this, it's harder than I expected. His tone softened, the weight of reality beginning to strip away his earlier defensiveness. Caleb, I said at last gently but firmly. Hard doesn't mean impossible. At some point, everyone has to carry their own home, their own decisions. I know. His voice was low. A beat of silence. Then I heard Lola's tiny voice in the background. Daddy. Caleb responded quickly, then said, Mom, I'll call you later, okay? He hung up. March's coastal wind still held a lingering chill. I wrapped a pale gray scarf around my shoulders and sat at a table in my favorite seaside cafe. A latte sat before me, the foam half sunken. Through the window I could see fishing boats docked along the harbor, their flags snapping in the breeze. It was almost time. The bell over the cafe door chimed. I looked up. Caleb stepped inside. He wore a blue hoodie, his face tight, brow furrowed with unspoken worry. When he saw me, he pressed his lips together, then walked over quickly. Mom. He pulled out the chair and sat down, his voice quieter than usual. I gave him a gentle smile and nodded but said nothing. I wanted him to take his time. To find his words. Outside, the wind rattled the glass. Inside, a slow jazz tune played under the hiss of the espresso machine. Caleb stared down at a ring of water on the table, his fingers tapping restlessly against his coffee cup. Finally he spoke. Mom, I want to say I'm sorry. He looked up and for a moment I saw something raw in his eyes. Not resentment, not shame. Just a boy. Looking for his mother after a fall. My heart softened. But I kept my expression calm, kind. And I waited. I know you've done so much for us over the years. Caleb said, his voice rough, almost hoarse. And I took it all for granted. I just assumed you'd always be there, that helping was what you were supposed to do. He paused, exhaling quietly. It wasn't until you stopped that I realized, what I lost wasn't just money. He looked up at me, eyes heavy with guilt. I lost your trust. Your presence. That feeling of you being there, really being there. I didn't interrupt him. I let every word land where it needed to inside both of us. I can't keep expecting you to clean up after us, he said with a bitter smile. And I definitely can't use your love to excuse my own immaturity. In his eyes I saw exhaustion, shame, but also a flicker of late-blooming clarity. It pricked something tender in my heart. But more than anything it brought me peace. I took a slow sip of my coffee. Its warmth, its slight bitterness, oddly comforting. Then I spoke. Caleb. My voice was gentle but every word came steady and sure. Love is not a transaction. It isn't measured in dollars. And it doesn't survive on endless sacrifice. I looked at him, really looked. I helped you because I love you. But that love should never be mistaken for obligation. I'm not an ATM. I'm not your crisis manager. I'm your mother. My voice never rose but each word cut through the space between us. Clearing out all the assumptions, the quiet misalignments we'd been dragging for years. Caleb bowed his head like a boy who knew he'd gone too far. His fingers traced idle circles on the tabletop. His shoulders slumped. I get it now, Mom, he whispered. I'll do better. I sighed and reached over, resting my hand gently on his. I'm not asking for payback, I said. I just want us to move forward, as two whole, separate people. Respecting each other. Caring for each other. But not using dependence to replace love. From outside came the laughter of children on bicycles. And the sunlight that streamed through the cafe window danced across our table in golden patches. Caleb lifted his eyes to me and for the first time in a long time I saw ease. That familiar look of a little boy proudly tying his own shoes and running to show me. Our conversation didn't last long. But it held more weight, more truth. Then all the surface-level chatter we'd had for years. We didn't patch every wound that day. We didn't end with a clean, "It's all fine now." But we began again. From a place that was stronger. And more honest. As we said goodbye, Caleb leaned in and hugged me. It was a little awkward. But it was real. "Thank you, Mom," he said softly. I gave his back a gentle pat and smiled. "Go on," I told him. "There's someone at home waiting for you." I watched him leave, then sat back down and ordered another coffee. Outside, the harbor wind stirred the boats and carried the scent of salt and something else. Freedom. By April, the sun had begun to soften over the little coastal town. New buds had emerged at the tips of the trees, and the flower beds on the corners burst with pansies in every shade of joy. I walked down the street toward the community center, a worn canvas bag slung over my shoulder. Inside was a small project I'd recently finished. A handcrafted miniature theater titled, "The Changing Shape of Home." Today was the spring showcase. The Arts Center had called and asked if I'd like to display my piece in the community exhibit. It wasn't a prestigious event, just neighbors and friends. But to me it meant everything. The space was small with exposed beams and windows that flooded the room with light. I set up my miniature stage carefully, adjusting every little backdrop and prop light until it felt just right. An older gentleman walked by and smiled. "This is beautiful," he said. "Looks just like the backstage of a real theater." I thanked him, a quiet warmth rising in my chest. Not because I needed the praise. Not because I was trying to prove anything. But because after all these years, this was still mine. Still something I loved. And now it belonged to me again. Not long after, Nancy from the old theater group arrived. She was still full of unshakable energy, the kind of woman who always had a plan and a clipboard. "Nancy." I waved and she hurried over, her eyes darting excitedly from detail to detail. "You know," she said, lowering her voice like it was a secret, "we're starting a senior stage prop program, Silver Theater. We need someone experienced to lead it." I blinked, surprised. Nancy smiled and squeezed my hand. "Not for money. For meaning. For the women who, like you, buried their passions under diapers and dinner plates. Let's give them a stage again." My heart gave a sudden solid thump. Like a light flipping on in a room I thought was long abandoned. That afternoon I signed the agreement. One day a week I would serve as consultant and teacher, guiding our local Silver Theater group in building stage sets, and running small hands-on workshops in stagecraft and props. Not a job. Not a burden. Just a quiet return. To something I had loved. And had finally reclaimed. "Maybe next time," I said with a smile. "Today I'd like to save a little time for myself." They didn't insist. But before she left, Lola ran back and wrapped her tiny arms tightly around my waist. "Grandma, next time I'm gonna draw an even bigger stage for you," she announced proudly. I laughed, unable to help it, and promised, "I'll be waiting." In early May, the wind over our coastal town finally began to carry the scent of summer. The air was warm with a touch of salt. The sea shimmered under the afternoon light, and flower pots and string lights lined the storefronts of the cafes on every corner. I wore a simple linen dress and a pair of well-worn canvas shoes as I made my way alone toward the exhibition hall. In my hand was a small box, inside a handcrafted miniature theater set. Tonight was the final showcase for the Spring Silver Theater project. But this time I wasn't just an exhibitor. I was the instructor. Outside the venue, a small crowd had already gathered. Neighbors, students, families, even a young reporter from the local paper. The town's longtime residents mingled with paper cups of coffee, chatting cheerfully as they admired the handmade sets and scenes on display. I stood to the side watching my students proudly describe their creations, and a wave of emotion rolled through me. Not the kind that shows on the outside, but the kind that fills your chest quietly and deeply. It wasn't pride. It was belonging. A sense that I had found my place again. A sense that my value didn't depend on anyone else. It was mine. Near the end of the exhibit, a young woman in casual clothes and oversized glasses approached me. She introduced herself as an editor for a small local arts magazine. He handed me a card, smiling. "Your story is incredibly moving," she said. "We're putting together a feature on local artists for next month. Would you be open to an interview?" I blinked in surprise, then smiled. A quiet, long-lost confidence stirred gently inside me. Of course, I said. Night fell. The exhibition wound down. People drifted off into the soft hum of evening. I packed up my little stage set and stepped outside. The sea breeze lifted the hem of my dress, carrying the faint scent of tide water. The coastline in the distance curved like a soft, blurred line, and the town's lights sparkled in the dark like scattered silver. I walked slowly down the coastal path, past the cafe, past the old post office, past all the small corners I used to rush past, too busy to notice. Eventually, I found myself standing in the center of the plaza just outside the exhibit hall. There was an empty patch of land there, once intended for a new community project. Now it held only a single wooden sign. Your story starts here. I stood in front of it for a long time, thinking back on the past year. The loneliness, the heartbreak, the bitter unraveling of roles I thought I'd play forever. And then, the slow, sometimes clumsy, sometimes quiet journey back to myself. And now here I was, still standing, on familiar ground that somehow felt brand new. That's when I finally understood. Every act in the play of life is meant to be written by your own hand. Not your son's, not your family's, not the version of yourself others want you to be, but your own. And from here on out I'd keep walking forward, like stepping into uncharted waters, not knowing exactly where the road would end, but trusting that each step would be mine. Just mine. I turned to glance one last time at the exhibition hall behind me. A string of little lights still twinkled above the porch, soft and golden, like lanterns lit for those brave enough to begin again. I smiled, and whispered to myself, this time, I'm writing the script.